to just sum it up here, we have the wrong leaders in power. And we, the people, okay, all of us who are not the Epstein class, the 99% of we, the people, common folk, we have to replace the Epstein class as quickly as possible. We, the people, have to go rogue. We have to go rogue and stop letting this corporate monopoly, international organized crime Epstein class choose the two presidential candidates that they lie to us and tell us that we're electing, because we're not. We have to end that. They're the ones that are picking them and fooling us into telling us that we voted for them and that we chose one. It's all predetermined by these a-holes. And Trump, whether it be Trump or Biden or Kamala, or whether it be Clinton, whether it would have been Hillary, they all are pre-selected because they're going to serve the interests of the Epstein class. That's what we have to end. We have to wake up and realize we have to end that once and for all. We have to end their sick, violent, war-prone, male-oriented, patriarchal, Judeo-Christian, Zionist-oriented leadership. It's motivated by bigoted, divisive, we are the chosen ones faiths. And we have to quickly replace that with more of a matriarchal, feminine system of leadership based on the much stronger, healing, nurturing, compromising feminine strengths. Femininity is strength. It's the kind of strength the world needs, the nurturing, healing, compromising, coming together, motherly, loving, caring strengths, uniting strengths, not warmongering, testosterone-driven, violent, whose dick is bigger than the other's strength. This has been the problem for way too long now that we have to replace. We need more healing, matriarchal leadership in world power in order to create unity and real spiritual healing that I talk a lot about in both of my books. I've told you before, if the show was to have any other name, it would have to be The Big Scheme of Things. And actually, that is what the title of this episode is going to be tonight, The Deadly Big Scheme of Things. It's based on a very powerful Blockbuster article that I recently reposted, I guess you'd say. There's a little story behind that. Reposted it on Substack. And that's what the show is going to be based on tonight. So it's quite the big blockbuster broadcast, okay, coming up. So you definitely don't want to miss it. But you know me, we have so much material to get to, but it means too much to me. I don't want to start the show without thanking all of our viewers in our respective markets across the nation. So because we've grown to over 20 markets, they tried to shadow ban me and silence me and all that, and they don't want to give me a break in show business and in network television. Okay, you know what I did? You see what I did? I created my own network. So we have over 20 markets nationwide, and I couldn't be more proud. So let's begin by thanking everyone watching in our hometown audience of Sacramento, the capital of California. Thank you for tuning in. And also our sister city right next door, Davis, California. Thank you for watching. We have several other markets in California, so let's continue. Let's begin over at Truckee, Tahoe, just a little bit to the east of us here. Welcome to all of you watching. And then moving over a little westward, we want to welcome everyone watching in Napa Valley and wine country. Thank you for tuning in. And in the actual Bay Area, we have 3 markets. Welcome to everyone watching in Berkeley, San Francisco, and San Jose at Create TV. And then moving down to Southern California, we have a couple of markets. Welcome to everyone tuning in Long Beach, in Santa Cruz, and Gilroy. Now moving outside of California, we want to welcome our 2 markets in Oregon. Welcome to everyone tuning in Portland at Open Signal, and all of you watching in Beaverton, Oregon. Also moving to the center of the country, one of our long-standing markets. Welcome to everyone watching in Denver, Colorado. And then on the East Coast, starting at the southernmost point, welcome to everyone tuning in Salisbury, Maryland, and all of you tuning in one of our longest standing markets, Salem, Massachusetts. Also, welcome to 2 of our newest markets. Welcome to everyone watching in Manhattan and Staten Island, New York. And then a little further northward, we want to welcome everyone tuning in Stratford, Connecticut at Soundview Media. And last but not least, we want to welcome everyone watching in the Falls area of Vermont, which would be Keene Station and Bellows Falls. And I don't think I left anyone out. Wherever you are worldwide on the web, I want to thank you for tuning into the show. And I want to ask you, like I've been doing more and more here lately, please, if you would, since I am being so shadow banned and have been for the longest time, more than most of the creators out there today, I was the early voice getting shadow banned and demonetized long before most of them who are getting amplified today that you might hear talking about some of the same thing. Well, I was the pioneer of it. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. The very thing that got me so shadow banned long before most. I was one of the earliest voices raising awareness about the lies we were told regarding 9/11. And not long after that, YouTube demonetized me, and it's just been more and more of the same because I haven't stopped. And like I said, that's why I had to create my own television network on cable access that I couldn't be more proud of. So that's why it's, like I said, so important for me to, at the beginning of each show, welcome everyone. Thank your lucky stars for cable access, because it's one of the few bastions of free speech left anymore. They've shut down so many of all the other like independent radio stations where I got started in talk radio. That's pretty much a thing of the past because of the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that allowed for the big conglomerates to buy them all up and put their corporate bullshit narrative on them so that independent voices can't be heard on talk radio anymore. It's just almost unheard of, So that's why I say thank your lucky stars for cable access, where I can get my voice, where you can find me and hear independent voices bringing you the truth that you don't get from the mainstream media. So please seek out my content. You can find my show always on demand at conniebryan.com. Also, if you would, please go and look for my content on rumble.com, where I'm not shadow banned quite as much as on YouTube. You still have the same powers that be who own Rumble, so I am getting heavily shadow banned, but not quite as bad. So you could maybe help boost it a little bit more on Rumble. So it would be rumble.com, and it would be The Connie Bryan Show. And also youtube.com, the Connie Bryan Show. If you would go on, and what really helps is that you like the content. You have to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, hit the subscribe, and that helps to bring the show up more and help it to be found more against the algorithms that seek to hold programs like mine back. They program these algorithms to do that, and when you go on and like and subscribe, it kind of overcomes that and helps tell the algorithm to boost it some. And then if you would share it, so there's also a share button, that goes even further, okay? So I just want to kind of help you guys understand how like I've told you, you're a part of my ministry. This isn't just entertainment. I'm bringing a ministry of healing and change, which reminds me to encourage you to check out my newest book, my second book called Change. And I'm so excited. It's just recently published, and you'll find it anywhere books are sold. I got it up on Barnes and Noble finally, and it's up on Amazon. Just type in Connie Bryan and Change, and you'll find it. And it's basically, uh, in a nutshell, it's my show in book form, and some just powerful content in each chapter, different topics, also some very intimate revelations about my life, and helping people understand what it means to be transgender, and correcting, exposing the lies from the evangelical crowd, the Trumper MAGA crowd, exposing their lies and their bigotry about the topic. But that's just one or two chapters. Most of the book is just talking about really powerful content and topic matter that you don't get in the mainstream media, that you need to be aware of. Also, I have some of my comedy stand-up, some new stand-up I haven't even done on stage yet. It also tells the story of how I started the Connie Bryan Show and the big endorsement that I got from comedy legend Jonathan Winters, the whole story behind that. You're going to love the book. It's just, and also that tells the story of what happened to me in law enforcement. You will not believe how I got targeted and blackballed in law enforcement by the good old boy system. And I go into detail about that and about the way that we need to bring change in many different areas. But I specifically talk about the reforms we need to make in the area of law enforcement. It's just a very comprehensive book, but very easy to read, and each chapter being different, and it's not overwhelming. So anyway, I want to remind you about my second book just coming out. And I think I've covered all the announcements, so let's get right into it. The title of this episode is Exposing the Deadly Big Scheme of Things, and the subtitle is Documenting the Evidence of the Deep State's Obsession with False Flag Terror. Now, you can find this on Substack. I really would encourage you to. And I also have 2 or 3 new Substack articles that I really would like to ask you to go and check out, because they have to do with exposing Trump and what the Epstein files have revealed of allegations against him of rape, and even allegations against him of death threats toward underage girls. It's such a lie, where he recently was on Air Force One. It's one of his biggest lies yet on Air Force One, where they ask him about the Epstein files, and he says, "Oh, I'm completely exonerated. The Epstein files completely exonerated me. I'm fully exonerated from the Epstein files." Did I make that clear? And of course, they're like, "Well, Mr. President, there are underage girls that are alleging that, what do you say about the allegations against you? They're completely not valid, and they're not verifiable. But if they're about Clinton, yeah, we're going to keep those in." So it's just ridiculous, the gaslighting that you get from him and his lapdog Pam Bondi and Kash Patel. So I've got these are also Substack articles going into detail, showing you what you need to be aware of that the mainstream media is not showing you, of the evidence coming out implicating him, and also some of it that the DOJ posted and then took down, that I exposed. So I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to tell you, please go check those articles out, and I may be doing an episode in the near future on those. Might even do a special report on some of that content. But all right, so now let's get to this episode tonight. The topic: exposing the deadly big scheme of things, and we're going to be talking about the history of the deep state's use of false flags. Of course, the biggest one that people are thinking about beyond the JFK, which we'll talk about, is of course 9/11. So we're going to get to that. But first, let me say, do you know? And by the way, isn't this cool? I'm not using paper script anymore. I've upgraded with my technology now to using my flip top Omnibook. So we'll see how that works out. I kind of like having papers in my hand, but we'll see how this works. Now, my first question to start this off is, do you know where the original coining of the term conspiracy theory comes from? Now, we don't deal with conspiracy theories per se here. I give you facts, okay? Evidence. Conspiracy facts and conspiracy evidence. And I just want to tell you, if you don't know where that term actually originally came from, it was a term coined by CIA propagandists, and it was around the time of the JFK assassination and during the Warren Commission's quote investigation into it. Okay, so propagandists of the CIA after the JFK assassination and in the Warren Commission's controlled misdirection. That's what it was. It wasn't really an investigation. Their controlled misdirection on who the assassin was, which resulted in immediate major pushback from a large number of vocal Americans at the time, calling horse shit, okay? On the Warren Commission's findings, they were saying this is horse shit. It wasn't just a lone gunman. More and more that's come out. It really wasn't even Lee Harvey Oswald at all. Okay, that was completely he was completely made a scapegoat and a fall guy. The truth was completely misdirected. That's why I said the Warren Commission was just a misdirection. It wasn't really an investigation. So the CIA, desperate to brand any and all who questioned their official JFK assassination narrative, they wanted to brand anyone who questioned it as being crazed, tinfoil hat wearing kooks. They came up with this disparaging term, and the mainstream media that they've controlled for ages, and that came out also in the church hearings, which we're going to touch on in a minute, of 1975. Senator Church was leading these hearings in 1975, and it came out that the CIA, through a project called Mockingbird, had infiltrated all of our major news media. Okay, so the news media that they control, they dutifully began pushing that CIA propaganda term, and they pushed it nonstop right around that time, that all of those critically thinking, right on target Americans were nothing but crazy conspiracy theorists if they questioned the Warren Commission's findings. And it has since been declassified and widely confirmed in mainstream media that not only were those Americans pushed back against the Warren Commission not crazy conspiracy theory conjecture, but that the CIA is now confirmed to have been in a joint covert conspiracy with the mafia, organized crime, and other intelligence assets, likely both U.S. and foreign intelligence. I'll let you just think about who that foreign intelligence may have been, so I don't get accused of being anti certain things. You can criticize the corruption of a certain group, of a certain nation, without being bigoted toward the people of that nation. You get my drift? So those who were involved in assassinating JFK, it's since come out that it was a joint conspiracy. It wasn't a theory, a joint assassination plot between U.S. intelligence, foreign intelligence, and the mafia to assassinate President Kennedy. Now, the reason I lead off with this topic is just to emphasize that you need to understand that there is a very, very dangerous and corrupt big scheme of things going on right now, and has been going on for a very long time. And it is they who coined the term conspiracy theorists in an effort to disparage anyone who tries to expose this deadly, corrupt scheming of theirs. And the core of that deadly, corrupt, scheming group of power elites that make up what is often referred to as the shadow government or the deep state. They are our own compromised U.S. intelligence, national security state, often in partnership with other foreign nations, like I said, and their respective intelligence services, to include both Saudi Arabia and Israel, and what is referred to often as the Zionist lobby. And of course, Israel's top intelligence agency that's comparable to the CIA being the Mossad. These deadly partnerships are, as I've discussed a lot on my show in recent past, specifically in my two-part series, Lies of Control, they are entirely controlled and compromised by and serving the interests of a very elite 1/10 of 1% of the world's wealthiest individuals. Corporate monopoly billionaire oligarchs, for example, who own Wall Street and the central banks, big tech, big pharma, big energy, big military industrial complex, with their wealth being the vast majority of the world's money supply. Now, I refer to these deadly big schemers as seeing themselves as above government, meaning that they see themselves as untouchable, above the law, and superior. This is important. They see themselves as they see themselves as elite and superior to all the rest of humanity that they view as being here to serve their big scheme of things. Otherwise, if they don't serve their big scheme of things, they see them as expendable. That said, it is critical that you understand that more and more this deadly global criminal cartel, which we're, more thankfully right now with the Epstein files, more and more people are waking up. They're seeing from the Epstein files, they're starting to wake up and realize, the truth that I've been bringing you. It's vindication for me here on the Connie Bryan Show. Finally, people are waking up to the point that now we're starting to see a phrase like the Epstein class trending on X. The Epstein class. Instead of just, the power elite or the elite class, or the billionaire class, where people are finally starting to run with the term the Epstein class. It's a great term because it kind of encapsulates what we're talking about. And people are able to see now this shadow government that people like myself have been one of the early voices telling you about for a long time. And like I said, that's the reason why I'm struggling with so much shadow banning still. But let's continue. It's critical that you understand more and more this deadly global criminal cartel that makes Mexican drug cartels look like Cub Scouts in comparison. They are engaging in what are known as false flags. You need to be clear on what exactly a false flag is. And once again, that's the reason why I began with the JFK assassination topic, because a false flag operation was what the JFK assassination was. It's an age-old, very corrupt and dishonest covert method used by power elite Epstein class schemers who see themselves as above the law, above everyone else. They can get away with anything. And they engage in this method in their imperial world control agenda, in which they commission their dutiful intelligence lapdogs, like the CIA, Mossad, MI6, on and on. Russia's version, GRU now, which is the name for it now. Back in the day, it was the KGB. But these power elite Epstein class, big scheme of things, international corporate cabal, international organized crime, with their imperial, it's hard for me to say that word tonight, their imperial world control agenda, they use this method to recruit and employ their dutiful intelligence lapdogs of, like I said, CIA, Mossad, MI6, and on, to commit these horrendous acts, these covert acts, whether it be an assassination or an act of terrorism, subverting the governments that don't serve their interests, that they want to replace. They claim to be all about democracy, wanting to spread democracy, but we see them more often than not subverting a democratically elected government and replacing it with a right-wing dictator, strangely enough. This is just such a long history of this kind of thing going on. And the mainstream media doesn't keep you informed about it like they should, because they're owned by these people. Now, what makes these things false flags is that these elites, they plan these horrendous acts so meticulously as to make them appear as though they were done by someone or some country who did not commit the act, in order to justify a desired retaliation or a coup replacement of that nation's top government leadership, like I was just talking about. And JFK's assassination was just such a false flag operation. And fortunately, we've finally received the confirmation from many reputable sources that the CIA was in fact part of that masterminding, planning, and execution of that horrendous act in our nation's history, like I said a minute ago. This false flag by the CIA, in partnership with organized crime leaders of the JFK assassination, was put into motion not long after John F. Kennedy fired one of the big schemers, top frontman, and former director of the CIA, Allen Dulles. So JFK's assassination was put into motion not long after he fired one of the power elites, one of the Epstein class's big frontmen, which would be basically like a lieutenant or a captain in the mafia. That being CIA director at the time, Allen Dulles. And, after JFK had then tried to stand up to the covert corruption of the CIA and had threatened to, quote, he actually said, JFK threatened to, quote, shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds, end quote. One of the best documentaries, I want to make sure I tell you about this so you can go check it out, that you could ever watch on this topic, presenting the powerful evidence exposing the lies of the Warren Commission, who were simply they were just more appointed lapdogs, just like Allen Dulles, serving the interest of those above government, power elite, Epstein-class schemers who commissioned JFK's assassination. The documentary that does the best job in covering this, it'll blow you away. It's so well done. It's called The Men Who Killed Kennedy. Check that out. You'll be so glad you did. Remember, I also mentioned acts of terrorism as often being used as false flags to achieve a desired outcome that would otherwise not be achievable. This brings us to the events of 9/11. Now, as I told you a little earlier, yours truly was one of the early voices back in the mid-2000s who was sounding the alarm, and I was bringing honest, independent journalism reporting to this clearly being a false flag operation, and not simply the lone work of 19 bumbling Islamic terrorists who attended a brief flight training course and told the instructors they didn't even care to learn how to land the plane. And on a related point to that, recall that experienced professional airline pilots have consistently confirmed that the skill it would take to succeed in flying a large airliner so perfectly into not one, but both of the World Trade Center Towers 1 and 2 are so difficult that even they might not be able to accomplish it at the 500 mile per hour airspeed they would be traveling. In other words, it takes incredible training, and even then, such a precise impact might not succeed, even by people who were fighter pilots, trained fighter pilots. That's who says this. That's how difficult of a job that would be. But that is just a tiny side note of all the much bigger evidence of the lies we were told regarding the events of 9/11 that I and many others began reporting on, with my original broadcast on this topic taking place in 2006 with Eric Hufschmidt, the author of the very concise and well-documented book, Painful Questions. Since my original independent journalism on this topic, exposing the huge amount of evidence exposing 9/11 as having been a false flag operation, I've been blacklisted and shadow banned in social media and on YouTube and other video streaming platforms, all of which are completely compromised and controlled by the CIA, the NSA, and Israeli intelligence. It's so much worse now than it was back when I told you it was discovered that the CIA was controlling the news back at the time of the Church Commission, the Church Committee investigation, Senator Church. That was in, like I said, the mid 70s, and they exposed that the CIA had already infiltrated the news media, and the operation was called Operation Mockingbird. So you can do a search on that on Google and find out more about that. Well, it's 100 times, it's exponentially worse today than it was back then, involving not just the news media, but even the mainstream video streaming platform. I mean, the alternative main video streaming platforms like Google and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter, X and Facebook and all of those, TikTok. And now TikTok has become completely controlled. We're finding out by the Israeli lobby, shutting down so much free speech, shutting it down, anything that criticizes them at all, and so many other topics. It's just the censorship is beyond belief. The internet, we thought, was going to level the playing field. We originally naively thought that. Now we're finding out what the real agenda was, for it to be complete control of the of humanity's speech, and to control your perception with what they want to put in front of you and program the content to be. So it's only their approved narratives now that are being amplified. And more what anything that challenges their approved narratives, they target it, shadow ban it, suppress it, throttle it, etc. Powerful evidence of this compromising and control by our national security state, which is joined at the hip with Israel's national security state. So we're talking about Mossad and military intelligence. Powerful evidence came out also recently with what are known as the Twitter files. Do you remember that? The Twitter files revealed that our own CIA, FBI, and other national and foreign intelligence agencies, when I say that, I'm talking about Mossad and Israeli intelligence primarily, but not that it's not that that's the only one, but primarily when I say other national and foreign intelligence, it's pretty much, for the most part, Mossad and Israeli intelligence. They were directly demanding and enacting censorship, content banning, and deplatforming of content creators like myself, who were trying to report on and expose corrupt lies at the expense of those intelligence agencies and their big scheming above government handlers. Because these intelligence agencies, they're just middle management. Okay, they're like lieutenants in the mafia. Maybe captains, capos, I guess you'd call them, if you were to look at it in mafia terms. The CIA and the people that work for Mossad and Israeli intelligence and the FBI and MI6 with Britain and GRU with Russia, they're just middle management. Even Putin and Trump, they're just capos, they're frontmen. Okay, they're lower level supervisors, if you will, frontmen shills that do the bidding of this shadow Epstein class that yours truly has been trying to expose for a very long time. The corporate control that we have to end, that is so corrupt, that thankfully these Epstein files are finally helping people to see. All right, and it's bringing vindication for people like myself, thankfully. And hopefully that's going to help me get around all of this censorship at some point and finally get some better breaks in the business, if you will, that I've been prevented from finding. Once more and more people, maybe some people that are in network television, finally realize, you know what, we got to, maybe some people who are in alternative video streaming, and wouldn't it be great if it was someone in YouTube that finally said, we're going to change things and we're going to empower these people we've been shutting down, because that really needs to happen. At least, if not, we need to create another platform for we the people where it's not infiltrated by this Epstein class. But anyway, I kind of got off on a jag there. This kind of control of the content of mainstream media by the CIA and our U.S. national security state is nothing new. Like I said earlier, it was exposed and declassified by the Church Committee in 1975, and I covered that quite a bit in my 10-part History of the Globalist series. So you definitely, if you haven't checked that out, you're going to want to go and look for that, which you can find on Rumble. You can find it in the show archives on my website, but definitely find it on Rumble, rumble.com, The Connie Bryan Show. My 10-part series on the history of the globalists. I covered the Church Committee, which was led by Senator Church and was a new investigation into the assassination of John F. Kennedy after nonstop demands, a new one. I'd say about, so the Warren Commission happened in 1963 or so. So you're talking about 10, 12 years later, the Church Committee was formed and led by Senator Church after nonstop demands from growing numbers of so-called conspiracy theorists, American citizens who were demanding a new investigation because they knew the Warren Commission's was BS. During their investigation, they too began to uncover early evidence of the CIA likely being involved in the JFK assassination, and also in the process, they exposed and declassified the CIA's long-standing practice of covertly embedding themselves into our nation's top television news networks. Like I said, the name of that declassified CIA operation that I would like you to check out, go and enter it into an online search, and you'll find it, was called Operation Mockingbird. Now, in keeping that in mind, maybe you're still a little bit like a deer in the headlights. Oh, this is too much. I'm sorry, I hate to be overwhelming you. If you're struggling to believe that our own nation's leaders could ever engage in such deadly deceit and diabolical corruption, let me just say, have you been trying to keep up at all with what's coming out in the Epstein files? So you're just going to have to get past that feeling, that deer in the headlights feeling that you just can't imagine. You got to get past that naivete. We can't make progress with people just thinking they can just bury their heads in the sand and say, I don't want to think about it. Let me share one other declassified CIA and military intelligence document with you that's going to help you get past that. I've covered it in depth on my show in the History of the Globalist series. I showed it to you in that series. Like I said, you can find that series on rumble.com. Just type in on Rumble, The Connie Bryan Show, that 10-part globalist series. Before JFK was assassinated, the power elite were obsessed with overthrowing Cuba's communist dictator, Fidel Castro. So much so, this is how obsessed they were at overthrowing him. JFK, President Kennedy, was shocked to have his own top, you're not going to believe this. I hope you're sitting down. Strap yourself in for this one. JFK was shocked to have his own top CIA officials and his own top generals of his Joint Chiefs of Staff come into the Oval Office and present to him what has since been declassified in the 90s. Finally, it was declassified, but up until the 90s, it was still top secret. Declassified in the 90s, what is known as Operation Northwoods. Okay, so you're going to want to type that into an online search and check that out if you don't go and watch my Globalist series where I present it to you. I think I presented to you in the Globalist series toward the end of the 10-part series. Operation Northwoods contained nothing but diabolical and deadly, nothing but deadly, diabolical, false flag scheming by these top intelligence and military officials of our own country, calling specifically for are you ready for this? Calling for contrived acts of terrorism. You heard me right. Including crashing or shooting down of passenger airliners and blaming it on, you guessed it, Fidel Castro. Among several other similar proposed false flag violent acts, all of which in which civilians would have been collateral damage, just like 9/11. With the blame being falsely placed on Cuba in order to create rage on the part of Americans. And that would give them the support that they sought in order to invade Cuba and effectuate regime change there. Now, does that sound familiar to you? It should sound very familiar because that is exactly what the intended outcome was after the events of 9/11. As a matter of fact, it is undeniably on record and widely known that the neoconservative think tank Project for a New American Century, from which President George W. Bush would select key cabinet officials and administration staff from, the Project for a New American Century was aggressively calling for the need for what they kept referring to as a new Pearl Harbor event. Why? In order to galvanize American support for military invasion and occupation of the Middle East. And more specifically, to galvanize support from Americans for a U.S. invasion of Iraq for the purpose of overthrowing Saddam Hussein. Okay, so that's a little more contemporaneous, but first I showed you Operation Northwoods back at the time of JFK before they assassinated him. They came in with Operation Northwoods. Same thing, they wanted to engage in terrorism that would cause civilians to be killed as collateral damage and blame it on Castro so that they could galvanize support to invade Cuba. All right, see? So when you go and you read Operation Northwoods, it's going to help you get past that deer in the headlights stuff, and you're finally going to get past it and go, wow, I guess it's right here in black and white. You know, and you're going to be able to realize how extensive this is in the history of the deep state, how they're doing it even more and more today, planning this kind of stuff. So that was what was behind the events of 9/11, was the desire to use it as a new Pearl Harbor event, which is what the Project for a New American Century was actually saying on their website. We need a new Pearl Harbor event. And then when it finally happened, they were able to create the false flag. That's exactly what they all started saying. This is a new Pearl Harbor. You heard Condoleezza Rice and Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and I think it was even Bush, all spouting that narrative that 9/11 was a new Pearl Harbor, okay, and that's how they galvanized Americans and lied to them and created rage among Americans to support that invasion of Iraq. So as I discuss in both of my current documentaries on the topic, I've got two documentaries on the topic that I really hope you'll go and check out. Again, you can find those on Rumble, and I actually put them up on YouTube, but they're being shadow banned and held back. You'll have to type it in: Connie Bryan 9/11, Eric Huffschmidt. You could type in Connie Bryan, the 28 pages, which is the one that where I cover the redacted 28 pages that have now been declassified thanks to President Obama, that show that the Saudi Arabians were Saudi royalty were who were behind financing the terrorists and all of 9/11. You're not going to believe it. You're going to have to go check it out. But let me get into a little more here. Both of my current documentaries, one being the one I did with Eric Huffschmidt, 9/11 Truth, Evidence of a False Flag. That's the title of it. So if you type that in, you'll find it on YouTube and on Rumble. 9/11 Truth, Evidence of a False Flag. And also my second very eye-opening documentary that I just talked about regarding exposing Saudi Arabia. It's called Never Forget the 28 Pages. You had 0 Iraqi hijackers among those who were documented as the terrorists who flew the planes into the World Trade Center. But what did you have? Who did you have? You had 15 of those 19 hijackers who were identified as being the terrorists, okay? 15 of those 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabian. Yet, immediately after the attacks, as though they were following a pre-arranged script, you had key top Bush administration officials, like I was just telling you, all in lockstep chorus, saying the same thing. This is America's new Pearl Harbor, and claiming that we needed to invade Saudi Arabia? No. Claiming that we needed to invade Afghanistan and Iraq because of it. But 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabian. And the mainstream media doesn't tell you about that, because they're lapdogs for the Epstein class behind all of this shit. Somehow the Bush administration and the CIA succeeded in their false flag psychological propaganda, and they were able to fool the nation and much of the world, along with their utterly proven false claims that Saddam Hussein also possessed what? What did they say he possessed? Weapons of mass destruction, which were never found. It was also very quickly proven that Saddam Hussein had 0 connections to Al-Qaeda or any planning of the events of 9/11. And this is where my second, and recently I updated it to be a half an hour longer, my 2025 documentary, Never Forget the 28 Pages. This is where that documentary comes in. Like I said, I originally released a half-hour version in 2020, which you might come across that one. But I recently updated it to a full 1-hour documentary with must-see new supportive content. And like I said, you can find both of those documentaries on my website at conniebryan.com, but you have to go in the show archives. But probably easier for you to quickly find it by going on either YouTube or Rumble and typing those in. But that particular one, the title is Never Forget the 28 Pages. Now, the 28 pages, what am I talking about? Well, the 28 pages, if you watch my documentary, you'll hear former Florida Governor and Senator Bob Graham, who was co-chairman of the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11. So there were 2 investigations into 9/11, 2 big ones. One was the 9/11 Commission, which was like the Warren Commission, total horseshit, total controlled, contrived results that lied about the events to cover it up, just like the Warren Commission. But there was also another investigation into it called the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11. And 28 pages of an entire chapter from their investigation revealed powerful evidence of who were actually the main funders and planners of the events of 9/11. And like I said, they were not Afghanistan or Iraq. That critical chapter was entirely redacted by the Bush administration. This information was deliberately withheld from the American people until President Obama finally courageously declassified it in 2015, and it contains some of the most critical information Americans expected to glean from any investigation into the events of 9/11. It contained implicating evidence of who was actually responsible for planning, funding, and orchestrating the 9/11 attacks. It shouldn't have come as any big surprise that it revealed the culprit was not Iraq or Afghanistan, but it was Saudi Arabia, with 15 of the 19 hijackers, as I said, being Saudis. But Saudi Arabia was just one of the main culprits involved. The Iraq War was launched primarily to serve the interests of Israel and the Zionist lobby, who we have come to see, especially more and more in recent years, has entirely compromised both parties. The Democrats and the Republican Party's leadership are completely compromised and controlled by the Israeli lobby, the Zionist lobby. You see how we're doing on time here? A little bit more time. We're getting close. Since the events of 9/11, it has also been confirmed by the FBI that they, in fact, did arrest a group of Israeli so-called art students who were caught filming the planes crashing into the World Trade Center towers from the top of a New York City building. Initially, reports of this were branded by CIA propaganda efforts as nothing but conspiracy theory BS. Of course, like I said, that's what they started pioneering at the time of the JFK assassination. But not long after, they were substantiated. Reports of this were substantiated by the FBI, who had to finally admit that they, in fact, did arrest those so-called Israeli art students. Did you hear me? The FBI, I want to make sure you get this, had to admit, they finally confirmed, yes, in fact, that happened. They did, in fact, arrest those so-called Israeli art students that were dancing on top of the building, filming planes crashing into the towers. And that those so-called art students from Israel were identified, among other things, as being connected to Israel's IDF military. Which is not surprising because most, if not all, young adults in Israel are required to enlist at some point in the IDF. What is even more disturbing is that they were later released to return to Israel. Can you believe that? And in a subsequent interview about this matter, one of them actually admitted that they were in fact there in New York that day to document the events. They were there. One of them actually admitted in an interview they were there to document the events on 9/11. In closing, as I've said before, the problem is we have to talk about the solution really quick before I run out of time. I've got a couple of minutes here. I should be able to wrap this up. Because we have to talk about, when we get into such heavy material, we have to talk about the solution. So I've got an article that I put up, one of the articles that I put up that I mentioned earlier on Substack that I really would like you to go and find on Substack is called "There's Only One Solution." And I'm going to just briefly touch on this, but I would like you to go see and read that article. I've got the playbook for the one solution that it's going to take to turn all this around and end all of this control by the Epstein class. And I get into it in particular in two articles I've written. That one is like a page and a half, 2 pages, that kind of introduces you to the bigger article that I wrote about what I call the Great American Compromise. So please go on to Substack and find those and check them out. And like I said, I may do a whole show on that content coming up soon, maybe even a special report, we'll see. But to just sum it up here, we have the wrong leaders in power. And we, the people, okay, all of us who are not the Epstein class, the 99% of we, the people, common folk, we have to replace the Epstein class as quickly as possible. We, the people, have to go rogue. We have to go rogue and stop letting this corporate monopoly, international organized crime Epstein class choose the 2 presidential candidates that they lie to us and tell us that we're electing. Because we're not. We have to end that. They're the ones that are picking them and fooling us into telling us that we voted for them and that we chose one. It's all predetermined by these a-holes. And Trump, whether it be Trump or Biden or Kamala, or whether it be Clinton, whether it would have been Hillary, they all are pre-selected because they're going to serve the interests of the Epstein class. That's what we have to end. We have to wake up and realize we have to end that once and for all. We have to end their sick, violent, war-prone, male-oriented, patriarchal, Judeo-Christian, Zionist-oriented leadership. It's motivated by bigoted, divisive, we are the chosen ones faiths. And we have to quickly replace that with more of a matriarchal, feminine system of leadership based on the much stronger, healing, nurturing, compromising feminine strengths. Femininity is strength. It's the kind of strength the world needs, the nurturing, healing, compromising, coming together, motherly, loving, caring strengths, uniting strengths, not warmongering, testosterone-driven, violent, whose dick is bigger than the other's strength. This has been the problem for way too long now that we have to replace. We need more healing, matriarchal leadership in world power in order to create unity and real spiritual healing that I talk a lot about in both of my books. For more specific detail on that regarding to my books, I hope you'll check out both Holy Libel and Change. Well, that's going to have to do it for this episode tonight. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll talk to you then.